Hi, it's Philippa here. Just before you get to the episode, I just wanted to tell you about something really exciting that's happening in October that Robbie and I are taking part in. And I'm talking about the HSP Awakening Summit. It's virtual, so it's online. It's totally free. It's been organised by the wonderful Jen Corcoran and Josh Sperano. And it's all about raising awareness for us HSPs and also for non-HSPs so that everyone can recognise that sensitivity is not a weakness. It's different, that's all. 30% of the population are thought to be highly sensitive. Equally 50% men, 50% women. That's 2 billion people. 2 billion people, folks. There's a lot of us, and I think a lot of HSPs just don't know that they are highly sensitive, which is why Jen and Josh have put together the HSP Awakening Virtual Summit, and Robbie and I are both taking part, and we are really excited to share this with you. So what is it about? There are 25 talks, I think, 5 each day over the 2nd to the 6th of October. And by the end of the event, HSPs and also non-HSPs will discover the many benefits of embracing the gifts that come with being a highly sensitive person. And some of the speakers actually refer to that as high sensory person. It's the same thing. The days are split into themes: learn, grow, sell, lead, and thrive. It's just so exciting. There are so many phenomenal speakers. I've had the great pleasure of connecting with them all over the last couple of months. It really is going to be brilliant. And I want you to know about this. I want you to know it's free. You can sign up now. You can have your name put on a waiting list now so that when the summit goes live, you'll be told, you'll be informed, and you can book which talks you want to listen to. All of them, if you want to. They will be available for a week afterwards. So you don't have to watch them on the day. You will get a recording and they will be available for a week. So please, if you're interested, if you know anybody who might be interested, please sign up and give our speakers all some love on the week of the summit. I will put the link to sign up in advance in the show notes. It's a bit complicated for me to actually read it out, so I will put it in the show notes. And if you're listening to this nearer the time, you can Google the HSP Awakening Summit. And I've tried that. It does come up, and you can book what talks you want to listen to at that time. But also, please go to the link and sign up in advance so that you don't miss a thing. Okay, that's it for now, and on with the episode. Hi, and welcome back to the HSP Connection podcast. As you know, I'm Philippa. And, anybody who's watching will see that I'm not with Robbie today. Today, it's just me. Although actually it's not just me, because I am talking to the wonderful Jane Elizabeth Aston, and we are going to talk about addiction. So we're going to talk about all about our personal experience and what we know and what we've learned and what we think around this subject. And I totally appreciate that this might be a difficult subject for some people to listen to, and if you'd rather not listen, now you've heard what the episode is about. I've given you quite a bit of time now to know that's what we're talking about, and maybe this might not be an episode for you to listen to, but for those of you who do want to listen, here we go. And Jane, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks. It's so great to be here. My first time as a guest on a podcast, so I'm delighted to be here with you.
Well, that's amazing, and thank you for being here. And yes, it's your first time as a guest, but it's not your first time on a podcast, because you have your own podcast with Alicia May, don't you, which is High Sensory People.
The High Sensory People podcast with Jane and Alicia. Yes, thank you for mentioning that. We just talk about all things to do with being HSP and high sensory from our own perspectives. And
you do, and it's wonderful. So anybody who's listening, go and find Jane's podcast or Jane Alicia's podcast and go and have a listen to that. And just to explain because we have explained it, Robbie and I have explained it on a previous episode, but high sensory is very much the same thing as highly sensitive, high sensory intelligence, highly sensitive person, high sensory processing sensitivity. They are all sort of the different names for what is essentially the same thing. And Jane and Alicia prefer to talk about high sensory. Robbie and I prefer to talk about highly sensitive. And those two things are the same, or and they are the same, or they, but we all have our own take on it. So yeah, please do go and listen, because you'll really love their episodes. But today we are here to talk about addiction. And before we do, Jane, would you like to introduce yourself? Because I think you'll do a better job of it than I will.
Well, maybe not. But anyway, I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm Jane, and Philippa and I met over at Illuminance. I was doing the coaching program there with Willow, so that's where I met Philippa. And I'm also a recovering addict and alcoholic. I do my recovery in 12-step programs. And I'm 13 years clean and sober. I've been around kind of 12-step programs for 20 years, but it's taken me 20 years to get 13 years clean and sober. And before that, I was a daily drinker and a daily user of rather socially acceptable drugs like marijuana and ecstasy, party drugs at the weekends, those sorts of things. So that's why you very kindly invited me on to talk about it all.
I did. And I've wanted to have a conversation with you about it for a while. And we sort of, now we're both here having this conversation. And people who listen to the podcast will know I've talked about my mum being an alcoholic. And I really felt there was a real overlap in our experiences to talk about. So my experience of addiction is being the child of an addict. My mum was an alcoholic. My dad couldn't, even though he had a triple heart bypass, could not give up cigarettes, another socially acceptable addictive substance. And neither, they're both died quite a long time ago, especially my dad. My dad died age 57. And also my own addiction, so given that was my parents' experience, it was absolutely given I was going to be addicted to something. My addiction was food, so I was a binge eater, and that was how I buried my feelings. And I also would class my people pleasing, my desire to achieve, as addiction. Because it did give me something, it filled a void within me. But of course, those are socially acceptable addictions, and maybe we'll get on to talking about them as well. But I just thought there was such synergy between your experience and mine, which are very different, but there's a real overlap. So thank you for coming to have this conversation with me.
So welcome. I just think these are really important topics, and addiction in one form or another touches many people's lives. As you say, a lot of it is really socially acceptable, and I also relate to the people pleasing and the trying really hard to achieve. And I've got one or two others as well in my my portfolio of addictions. Food as well, really disordered, eating in the past, just trying to change the way I felt, trying to manage my emotions. So yeah, I'm really glad that we're talking about this together.
Yeah, me too. And we've both linked our behaviors to the way we feel. And I think that's the other element of what really interests me here, is because the more I've learned about high sensitivity and realized I am a highly sensitive person, which I absolutely did not know. I mean, I did. That core wise part of me knew, but as on the outside, I did not know until I'd done a lot of therapy and sort of realized, okay, I'm not weighed down by all that therapy now. Who am I? And it turns out part of the answer to that is I'm highly sensitive. And the more I've learned about that for myself, the more I think perhaps my mum was highly sensitive. And because, you know, part of being highly sensitive is that we feel emotions deeply, we process them deeply, you know, where there's a lot going on. And now that you are where you are with your recovery and your knowledge of your high sensory intelligence and your, you know, high
HSP-ness.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you said that, because I say HSP-ness all the time on our podcast, and Robbie rolls around laughing.
Yes,
so
yes, it's quite funny, isn't it?
It is. So being
HSP.
Yeah. What do you feel about the correlation between those two things?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, I mean, my first, you know, the first way that I really found to manage my emotions, which were very strong, because you know, we were born HSP, aren't we? It's a genetic trait, you know, you either are or you're not. And then your environment, I think, can sort of augment it or not. You know, it can sort of morph a little bit by environment. But ultimately it's like you've either got brown eyes or blue eyes, you know, it's like one or the other. And yeah, so I was born HSP, and growing up, I found it difficult to manage my emotions, and I also didn't really get them seen or heard. And so I had to find a way to cope with that, and also kind of try and damp them down a bit so they didn't spill out onto other people, because that was not acceptable. You know, that was largely the way it was in the 1970s anyway. It's nobody's fault. It's just how it was. You know, that was a time when I think there was a lot of generational trauma, stuff from the war being played out. You know, it's, in some ways it feels like yesterday, but in other ways it was a really different world that we were living in then. So, you know, there were emotions were not, they just weren't really very welcome generally. Sugar was absolutely marvelous for me in managing my emotions. And I remember being 7, and I had a lot of feelings. I can't tell you what they were, but I had a lot of feelings, frustration. I think just like not being seen and heard was like a big one. That's a big theme that ran through my early life and teenage and 20s and so on. Yeah, this feeling of like, nobody sees me, nobody hears me. This is really, really painful, because, well, as HSPs, we have very deep emotions. We have a very rich and complex inner life. And when there's really no place to even let anybody know that that's happening, that's really painful. So I remember going to the shops and spending all my money. Money's also been a, you know, like an addictive thing for me. Like, as soon as I had it, I would have to spend it. Instant gratification, always, as a way of feeling different, really. I don't like the way I feel. Oh my God, I need to feel different. So, I'll spend all my pocket money on, you know, like penny sweets. I used to be able to get, or like you could sometimes get like 4 for 1 penny.
Oh yeah.
You could get like a white paper bag of like little white mice, cola bottles, you know, fizzy fish, like those outer spacer ones, spaceships with the sherbet in the middle.
Yeah.
You know, all of those, all the nice bonbons, all the 1970s sweets. So I'd go and buy a bag of those and come home. And I remember like sitting on my bed with this bag of sweets, this big bag of sweets, and just like eating them as quickly as I possibly could. I couldn't even taste them. But what I did get a sense of was like my feelings were going. I was literally stuffing them down with sweets. And that was the first time I think I was really aware of, you know, like I've got these strong feelings and I need to find a way to manage them. And sugar works. So that was my first drug of choice. That was my first addiction. And, you know, and I still, I'm not going to say I'm neutral around sugar. You know, I'm not. But it's a lot more balanced than it probably has ever been at this point in my life.
Yeah. And gosh, that's really taking me straight back to the 70s and sort of UK sweets.
Choices.
Yeah, exactly. And also the real visceral image of you sitting on your bed surrounded by these sweets and just stuffing them down as quickly as you like, one after another, probably.
Well, several at once, actually.
Yeah.
Several at once. And I had this real awareness of like, I don't know why I'm doing this.
Yes.
But I have to do it.
And that's really, you are really reminding me of that's the way I felt, that compulsion to, I've written a piece about that, about the swirling sort of, I describe the swirling, whirling, like all those emotions just going around inside. And I'm even pulling a face as I'm talking about it, this real like, deep well of like whatever's whirling around in it. And the only way to make it be still and not be whirling is to just fill it. And so for me, it was more carbohydrates, I think, just fill it with something, just fill it up as quickly as possible to get some silence,
some relief.
Some relief. And then afterwards, very quickly afterwards, there might be some silence, some peace, some calm for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes maybe. And then I don't know about for you, but then what came in was the racking guilt and the shame and the, oh God, what have I done?
And the nausea sometimes as well.
Yes. Yes.
Quite frankly. But yes, the shame, they're like, oh, I hate myself.
Yeah.
What's wrong with me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is then a really complicated cycle and circle to get out of, isn't it? Because the worse you feel, the more you want to eat to eat or whatever, do whatever it takes to stop it. And then it stops very briefly, and then it's the shame and the guilt, and you feel worse, and then it just, it's really, really, really tough when you're in it. And I have now wondered whether the depth of the feelings and the depth to which we're processing it as HSPs sort of really adds into that mix.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, we'll never know, will we?
Well, I was just thinking that.
We'll never know. And there probably needs to be some sort of like controlled experiments, which would not actually be terribly ethical.
No.
The design of which I can't think how they anyway. Some ethnographic experiments, some sort of. So we'll never know. But what I can tell you is that being HSP, I experienced a lot of emotions, and I didn't have really any coping strategies or tools to handle them, nor did I have any places where I could safely express them all.
Yes.
And so it became about numbing them to manage, to cope, to achieve, because that was important as well. That was, praised by the people around me, family, school, whatever. So I had to manage my emotions, and sugar was really good. And then alcohol provided me with relief, that's for sure. And the first time I got let loose with alcohol, I drank to blackout. The first time.
Wow.
I know. I was 14.
That's really interesting. Had you seen other people doing that and thought, oh, that might be something that would help me? Or
what, drinking to blackout?
I'm wondering.
I want that. No, but I can tell you what happened. I was at a party when I was 14. Suddenly there was like a lot of parties happening. It was like, oh my goodness, my 14-year-old social life exploded.
Yeah.
And that was really fun. And this first party that I went to, I remember there was a lot of cider. And I believe that the boys spiked it with vodka. I believe I saw them do it. I didn't care. I was like, that's just going to get the job done quicker. Did I think that at the time? I don't know. What I did was I drank 1 cup of it, like a plastic cup, those white plastic cups of cider. So I drank 1 cup. And what I remember was, because I went to a girls' school. I was at girls' grammar school. So I had a younger brother, but apart from that, I didn't know what to do around boys at all. Okay. They baffled me. I don't know. I thought I had to be a different person. to be good enough.
Right.
Because, you know, I somehow got that message. I think as HSPs, we often get that message. We're not quite right as we are, so we better change ourselves to be acceptable to the people around us. So I thought that that would be the case with like all boys, like half the world's population, and probably like most of the women as well and girls. So I was very concerned about this, and I drank this glass of this cup of cider, and by the time I got to the bottom, I just cared less about all of that, and I felt happier in my own skin.
Yeah.
And I thought, right, well, that was really good. I'll be getting another one of those straight down me. And I did. And by the time I got to the second one, I was like, I could pretty much talk to anyone in the room now. That's good, isn't it? And by the third one, I think I pretty much was talking to everyone in the room. And by the fourth one, I was talking to all the really cool girls who had the amazing hair and the wonderful makeup, who were a bit older than me, because I, you know. And then I don't remember that much after that, really. I mean, I think I had a good time, but I also behaved, I think, quite badly. I got, a little bit unruly. And then when somebody told me, I was like, oh, I can't believe I said that. You know, it was that.
Yeah.
And then I also gave myself alcohol poisoning that very first time. So I blacked out, had alcohol poisoning, spent the next 2 days throwing up.
Wow.
So it was a fairly dramatic introduction to the world of alcohol. And I suppose, you know, the difference between me, and there is the alcoholic gene in my family. My parents were not at all, but my auntie on my dad's side was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
She was not labelled as such, but she was.
Yeah.
You know, she really was. And then there might have been more as well, you know, there's whatever. And so I think, you know, the difference between me, you know, with that addiction alcoholic gene and somebody who, you know, just maybe likes a drink, or somebody who was experimenting, was that it didn't put me off doing it again.
No.
And again and again.
Yeah. And it became a way of, I don't know, coping.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a little bit better not to black out. You know, I did learn that. You know, I didn't want to spend, you know, I didn't want to waste every 2 days after every party I went to, you know, all through my teens, like being really poorly. So I did learn to manage that a bit better. But alcohol absolutely helped me to feel more comfortable in my own skin, more able to talk to everybody, and just to feel better and just to escape. And what it was, you know, I learned to control everything in my life, I think, because I didn't feel terribly safe to be myself. And I know, you know, I imagine that was similar for you as well. That's a big sort of adult child of alcoholics, you know, story, like feeling really, really unsafe.
Yep.
In your body, in the home environment. And so controlling and achieving is a way of, so I had that going on as well.
Yeah.
And so when I had a drink, or later, you know, when I went to university, drugs, that's where I discovered drugs really, and really got into those. It was just such a relief to be able to stop controlling everything for a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what, as you're talking, you're really reminding me of my sort of drinking in my 20s. And you know, and I think you've said to me before about, you know, who knows whether you would have been an who knows what the sort of the ingredients that went into the melting pot that led you to where you were. But yes, you are an you know, you are an HSP. There is sort of addictive genes in your family, and you know, you were introduced to things that were addictive. And I
sought them out as well.
Yeah.
I sought them out because I'm also a high sensation seeking HSP.
Yes.
So I liked the idea of the novelty, the risk,
the
slightly sort of rah, rah, rah aspect of it.
Yeah, it's definitely new and novel to start off with, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think being HSP meant that I don't know, I was more sensitive to the effects.
Yes.
In terms of, they made me feel really good, and they also made me feel really bad.
Yeah.
So it's like a piece of elastic, you know. I don't know. It's kind of like it will stretch a long way and make you feel really good, but then it will go right the other way and make you feel terrible. Whereas perhaps the non-HSPs around me, the alcohol and drugs did make them feel different, but they didn't feel as bad to start with, and nor did it make them feel quite as good, and nor were their hangovers as bad, and nor were the depressions that they got into quite as bad as a result either.
Yeah, because I'm definitely not saying that all addicts are HSPs, but I
No.
suppose what I'm just wanting to do, I suppose, for my own benefit, is to just investigate how you felt, because I'm pretty sure my mum was an HSP now, with the benefit of a lot of hindsight. But because I grew up with a mum who was an alcoholic, I mean, I have set my, as long as I'm not an alcoholic, I think I'm doing okay. Interesting. Like, because I absolutely did not want to be like her. So I did drink, and I've never been anti-drink at all. But I didn't drink a huge amount. I would drink a lot when I did drink, but then not drink in between, because I think, you talk about not feeling safe. Yes, I never felt safe. I never felt safe being out and getting really drunk so that I lost all control. I was never very good with that. And I think that's the adult child of an alcoholic sort of, I'm not going to lose control a bit, playing into that. But then when I was living in London in my mid-20s, I did really discover the joy of drinking and losing your inhibitions. And being able to, when you were talking before about being able to talk to everybody and coming out of your shell a little bit, or however you might describe it, I definitely discovered the joy of that, and that alcohol could bring me that at that time. And I was working hard, but I was playing hard, and I was enjoying it to some extent, but it was always felt like I was playing a part. I was always having to pretend, really, that I was part of this group, and that I never felt as good as everybody. I always felt my place in that group of friends was quite precarious, because that's what I knew. That's what my feeling of being home was, that it felt really precarious. So it's interesting, isn't it? It's how it all plays out. And now looking back, I can sort of put all these together and sort of see that it makes sense.
Yes, I really resonate with what you just said. And I think, what alcohol and drugs actually, because, it's my first experience with alcohol, shows I was not very good at keeping that in check, to the point where I couldn't even remember I had no memory of the night. So drugs were really good in that, there's uppers and downers, aren't they? And they keep you going and stop you getting into that place. And then there's ones that bring you down and help you go to sleep. So I used them all, really, to try and keep going. And what they did was they made me feel like I thought everyone else felt.
Yes.
They made me be able to act like everybody else. And they made me be able to stay out as long as everybody else and keep going as long as everybody else. And also, the work hard, play hard in my 20s. I did that. I mean, it took me to burnout, but I did that with the help of alcohol, speed, acid, coke, ecstasy, marijuana, sleeping pills, all of it. And I remember, when I got into recovery, and kind of going, but am I an alcoholic because I didn't drink in the morning, and am I an addict because I didn't inject heroin, I just smoked weed, and I had a really wise person say to me, but you're really clever because you balanced it all, didn't you? It was kind of drugs and food and alcohol and this, that, and the other. And she went, if you'd have done any one of those if you'd have just done one of those to the extent that you'd done them all, you'd be dead now. And I thought, yes, that's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's true. So I used them to help me be like everybody else, because I didn't know about the HSP trait. I mean, I think at that point, probably the original research was only just being done.
Yes.
And I didn't know about it. I didn't know who I was. I was in rejection of who I really am. And so I used drugs to help me with that rejection, really, to help me build this shell of performance and normality.
Yeah, well, and you'd already said that you didn't feel seen and heard.
No.
So you won't have felt accepted. I mean, I'm not saying you were rejected, but
not actively, no, but in my deepest
yeah,
core, I felt that I was unseen and unheard
yeah,
and therefore rejected.
yeah, and therefore, and then it becomes that you don't feel capable of allowing yourself to be seen because it doesn't feel safe to be seen because you've never been seen, and
Yeah.
and it really can ramp up quite easily and quite insidiously. And you make a very good point where you say that it helped you feel like you thought everybody else felt, but we never know how everybody else feels. It's all perception, isn't it? It's all I definitely had exactly the same thing, that I felt I had to put on this performance to be like everybody else, but inside I didn't feel like everybody else, and I felt I was broken, that there was something faulty in me because I couldn't do life the way that I saw everybody else doing life.
Yes. And then that, I don't know if this was the same for you in any respect, but that almost became another stick to beat myself with.
Oh yeah.
I can't do it like everyone else. There's something wrong with me. And then actually substances and food became a way to try and sort of slowly destroy myself.
Well, and that's a whole other element to it, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I'm really glad you've brought that up, because that's quite the dark side, and
Really
even dark because it's all a bit dark. But
it's all pretty dark. But from the dark comes the light.
Absolutely. But that is a whole other part of it, isn't it? That we are trying to fit in, but in doing the things that we're doing to try and fit in, we are really causing harm to ourselves.
We're dimming our light,
and we are dimming our light.
And I now look back and I see that when I dim my light, I feel as though I might as well be dead, and so I kind of try and almost make that happen, but very, very, very slowly.
And now you just said that, I got this real so yeah, there's that, because there is that light in us.
There is.
There is that real core, bright, shining light that but the part of us, both of us, it's the HSP, that sort of makes us feel that light, and that's where it comes from. But because we are not seen, it's not heard, we are rejecting it, because we're rejecting that part of us because we don't feel, and this is all subconscious, we don't feel it's an acceptable part of us, so we are pushing it down, we are keeping it as down as we possibly can, that it may well feel, well, what's the point of me being here?
Yes, because, well, we're silencing who we really are.
Yes.
And it's such hard work being who we're not.
Oh gosh, yes.
And it feels like, because it's not who we really are, we feel like people are going to find out.
Yeah.
Hence always feeling not good enough.
Yeah.
Imposter syndrome, because we kind of are. We had to be, really, to start to feel safe. But you can see it's a tangled web that we weave, isn't it?
It's a real tangled web, and it's so much deeper than we even realize sometimes, I think, because I think we've just touched on that. And a lot of people don't get out of it as well.
A lot of people don't, and it's terribly, terribly sad. And going back to your mom, and I think not all addicts and alcoholics are HSP by any stretch, but I'm going to say, from how long have I been in the rooms of, the various 12-step programs that I go to? 17 years, more than 17 years of going to regular meetings. My observation is that there's probably a slightly higher, or perhaps just a higher, proportion of HSPs in those rooms than in society at large.
Yes.
That's what I'm going to say. So if there's 20 to 30% of the world's population are HSP, it's more than that in recovery.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, because of two things. One, we experience the world in a very deep way. And that can, when we're not in an environment that helps us thrive, feel very painful. So we turn to things to make it feel better. And for some of some of us, that becomes a real problem that we can't get out of. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, being HSP, we also are able to tap into this intuition, even for me, even while I had a glass of wine in one hand and a spliff in the other hand, every single night. There was a bit of me that when I'm still working, I'm still paying my mortgage, I've still got friends, I've still got family, I've still got all the outside trappings, but this feels so wrong that I'm not sure I can do it. I could feel the light being snuffed out.
Yeah.
Before I lost everything. And it's my observation that, or my, I don't know, theory, that a lot of HSPs who do end up in recovery, because they get to that place of pain, that real spiritual pain, before losing everything, or before they, die from it.
Yeah.
But that's only if there's, I suppose, some sort of provenance or, divine provenance, or the window of opportunity presents itself to walk into that recovery, onto that recovery path at the right time. And so many people don't. And it's terrible. It's so, so sad. And, and I guess I'm curious, Philippa, to because you've mentioned this quite a lot of times, your mum, you suspect she was HSP, and tell me why.
I think in understanding how my childhood played out in my adulthood, which I didn't understand until I had my breakdown 6 years ago and went to therapy. I didn't understand how much my adulthood was being driven by my hurt inner child who'd experienced a lot of childhood trauma. And my mum died in the middle of that therapy. And, I do believe I was led to therapy, so I was already in therapy when she died, to be fair. Yeah. I think having understood a lot more about myself in that, I can really begin to understand how her childhood would have played out for her in her adulthood. I think I still feel she could have done better. She was not a good parent to me.
No.
And I've had to do my work to overcome a lot of the trauma. And it wasn't just her, to be fair. It wasn't just her. But also I can see the other side of that she is, a person in her own right, not just my mum. And she was suffering, and she was very much playing out things that had happened for her in her childhood. I'll never know the whole story. There's nobody around that I can ask anymore. But I do know she was desperately unhappy. And there's just little things about the way that, it's a really good question. Why do I think she's HSP? I was an HSP. I just think she felt things a lot. She felt things a lot more deeply. I'm trying to think of the right way to use those words. A lot deeper than she led us to believe. Yeah. And I think that's why she drank. I think she drank because she was really unhappy, because she was really trying to fit in with everybody. It was very much, growing up in the 70s and 80s and 90s, very much, keeping up with the Joneses, and look at us with a nice house, nice car. The kids are all dressed smartly. It was all about what it looked on the outside, whereas inside it was bloody chaos.
Yeah, but that didn't matter, did it? If it was all shiny on the outside, that's fine. time.
Yeah, and I remember, you know, it was very much the era of dinner parties and going out to dinner parties, and my mum would get dressed up, and like, you know, she'd come out of her bedroom wafting expensive perfume and dressed nicely, and she'd be painting her nails just before getting in the car and being driven by my stepdad to wherever they were going, and she just looked perfect. And I remember thinking, gosh, that's a lot of effort when there's not a lot of effort going in anywhere. This was my perception, you know, there wasn't a lot of effort going in anywhere else, but it was all for show. And the more I can see that it was all for show, and how unhappy she was, and she was always trying to be or get other people to see that she was something that fundamentally she wasn't. You know, she was most at home mucking out and riding a horse and being with animals. She so much preferred animals to people. And I think, you know, I think there was a deep unhappiness, a deep anxiety that I've never really been able to understand until reasonably like lately, you know. And Robbie and I did an episode not very long ago about forgiveness, and Robbie's really helped me think about forgiveness in a perhaps a deeper way than I've thought about it before. And I think all of this work, all these realizations I've had around my mum have allowed me to forgive myself, not forgive her because she wasn't a good enough parent to me or my brothers. But I have forgiven myself for feeling the way that I felt about her, and how angry I was, and how pissed off, and how sad I've been about the whole thing, because actually she had a lot going on for herself as well.
Yes, and that's really profound work that you've done around that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it probably is. I hadn't really, until I started talking about it in the episode on forgiveness, I hadn't really thought about I hadn't appreciated that that's quite what has needed to happen, that I've had to forgive me. I've not forgiven her, but I've come to some understanding, but I've forgiven me for the way that I've been in it all.
Yes, I think it's so important to do that because, you know, alcoholism, addiction, whatever form it takes and whatever part we play in our families, you know, if you've got an addict or an alcoholic in the family, or you've got anyone exhibiting those sorts of behaviours, they don't necessarily have to be manifesting in that particular way. The whole family dynamic gets really unhealthy. And you know, really difficult, and there is a lot of mixed up emotions and resentment that can weigh us down for the rest of our lives if we're not careful. And you know, for me, I've had to do a lot of forgiving of other people, and also a lot of accepting of myself. And I've done that with the help of 12-step recovery, you know, as I think you know as well. You know, part of that is looking at, you know, all our resentments, looking at our part in it, forgiving the other people involved, you know. And I know that's a process. I'm still working on that in some areas, but you know, there are a lot of people who I'm just like, you know, I used to be furious at and now I'm not, but it took a while. But also I think, you know, you know, we make amends to people in the 12-step recovery program as well. And I've made a lot of direct amends to friends, family members, you know, virtual strangers, shops, you know, banks. I mean, all the places. I mean, really, I've gone and done things I can't even believe I did. But what that helped me to do was to forgive myself over time. That's the most important reason for doing those things. Actually, it's not about getting forgiveness from other people. It's coming to a peaceful place within ourselves. You know, and they were different reasons. You know, for me, it was stuff I'd done in my addiction, and for you, it was, you know, the way you felt about, you know, your upbringing. It wasn't good enough. You know, your mum did her best, but it wasn't good enough.
No, and I think that's quite a hard thing to come to terms with in a way, because I think we are told that we should forgive, and I don't really forgive her for the parenting side of it, but I do. Well, I don't know. It's quite complicated. I think. I don't know why I'm hesitating. I don't know whether I do really. I don't know what. I think I would forgive her for the way that she chose to deal with the way. I feel really sad, I suppose, that she felt so. However, the way she felt that drove her to be the way that she was. But I still cannot forgive that. But she doesn't need my forgive. I mean, she's not here anymore. I mean, she needs to forgive herself for that if she was still here. It's not about that, but it is quite complicated, and the shame and the guilt comes down the generations, and I needed it to stop with me, so that I am not passing it on to my children. I mean, I will no doubt screw my children up in one way or another, but I'm going to do my damnedest to repair where I can. And I don't want to pass on to them any of the shame that I feel for the way I grew up, and what I've brought to our family as a result of that. So I've had to forgive myself for that, because until I became so much more aware of these things over the last 6 years, I very definitely have brought it into this family, which is one of the reasons why I ended up in therapy in the first place, because I knew I was screwing my kids up, and I said, I've got to do something about this. I cannot carry on like this.
And I just think it's just so wonderful and brave and amazing that you, and, you know, quite a lot of people I know are looking at this and dealing with their family dynamics and their children in such a different way, such a courageous way, because we're in a society where it's easier to do that. We've got a little bit more time. It's more important somehow, you know. Yeah. It's just about, we live in very different times where there is a real chance where, you know, it could stop with me. And I don't have children, so I don't have that worry of passing on my my addict genes to anyone else. You know, I don't have that, but I see a lot of it. I see a lot of reparation and preventive action happening around me, and that is a really wonderful thing.
Yeah. And I have to acknowledge that that's a privileged place to be. You know, I could afford to go to therapy for 3 years, and
we're privileged.
And I'm very grateful that I was in that position. And I also understand that not everybody is in that position. And
no, although 12-step programs are completely free.
Right. Well, there you go then.
Out there, and there are 12-step programs for, you know, alcoholics, addicts, adult children of alcoholics, codependents, food addicts, money, you know, overspenders, gamblers. You know, I mean, if you've got a problem, there's probably a 12-step program for it, and they are all completely free.
Well,
all you need is the time to attend. And pre-COVID, that was also quite difficult because, you know, maybe there weren't specific meetings. There weren't actually in every town in the country, in every country in the world. But now there's so many online meetings that it doesn't matter where you live.
Yeah, amazing.
You'll be able to get the help that you need for free. All one needs is the willingness to try. So just a shout out for that.
Yeah, great. And thank you for that. And you mentioned codependency there, and codependency was my route in, because we all have a different route in to where we start doing the work and the recovery. And mine was learning about codependency and realizing that's absolutely what, you know, my relationship with my mother was like. How did recovery come about for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it was, I mean, you know, all through, like, from the moment I started smoking marijuana, or weed as it became known to me, I was told, it's like, it's not addictive, is it? It's a non-addictive drug, marijuana. This was in the late 80s. It's not addictive. It's one of the few that isn't addictive. So I was like, brilliant, I'll do this. And it was a great, really good at numbing my emotions. So when I felt low, as I did often, it made me feel a bit better, took the fear away, took the anxiety away. When I felt a bit high, which I did sometimes, got a bit overexcited, didn't know how to cope with that either, it would like bring me down. It just leveled me out. And in the end, all it did was numb me and get me in this really narrow sort of window of like blairness. But I did get addicted to it. It's terribly addictive.
Yeah.
It's psychologically addictive. And as I found out when I did try and quit, it is also physically addictive. You get night sweats. You get terrible anxiety when you're coming off it. The night sweats are really something. The crazy dreams. A lot of people don't know about this.
No.
But when you've done it, you know about it, because it actually suppresses dreams quite substantially. So I had a history of insomnia right from when I was a child. It's quite unusual, but also I think fairly common amongst high sensory children, because we've got a lot of stuff going on in our heads, and therefore it's difficult to wind ourselves down, get a good night's sleep. And when I got older, I realised that having like smoking weed all evening and then basically taking a spliff to bed and smoking it in bed would like put me out like a light. Brilliant. And so, yes, I got really dependent on it for sleeping, but also it meant I didn't dream for about 15 years.
Right.
And so once you stop, it is my belief that an awful lot of those dreams make their way out in glorious sort of technicolor, a bit like a Beatles Yellow Submarine cartoon dream. I mean, that's going on, and you wake up and go, feel as though I have never slept in my life, even though I've slept for 8 hours. So that's a lot. So I got, physically and psychologically and emotionally dependent on marijuana, to the point that I had to have it all the time, and I had to smoke it every day after work, and it was the only thing that got me through. I mean, it helped me get a degree, it helped me get a master's, it helped me keep down jobs, it helped me to cope, but it also took me to a place of my inner HSP screaming at me, it's not supposed to be like this, it's not supposed to be like this, it's not supposed to be like this. And in the end, I read an article in the Guardian newspaper called My Life as a Marijuana Addict. And it was the first time I'd read somebody's story, because, we knew about heroin and we knew about cocaine and stuff, they're terrible. They get people into terrible trouble. You lose the septum in your nose, or, like you lose a leg, or, I mean, it's awful. But smoking weed, the non-addictive drug, people just do it at festivals. Oh, it just really mellows you out. This article told my story. It was somebody who couldn't do without it, but then had managed to stop with the help of a 12-step program. And so that's what got me in, because it coincided with me being at a spiritual bankruptcy point. So I got into the 12-step recovery when I read an article about it in the Guardian.
And you've just said a very similar thing to me, that you read something that was like, it could have been written about you.
Yes.
And I read a codependency.
And
I read a codependency book that was like, oh God, this is like my life laid out in front of me. And I needed that reflection, that something reflecting back to me what my experience was, because I'd been so good at sort of pushing it away, and I didn't want to see it.
Yes, well, and there is also something about just having to carry on. Oh,
yes.
I've just got to carry on. Oh, I'm just making a fuss. There's something really wrong with me, but nobody thinks there's anything really wrong with me. Everybody thinks I'm just being like normal, or just a bit, just a bit maladjusted or whatever, just a bit odd, a bit depressed, and then to read this article in a newspaper of somebody who lived like me and thought like me and used this particular substance like me for the same reasons, and it took her to the same emotional place of hopelessness. It was really validating. It was a relief. I read it several times, and the following week I went to it was not my first meeting, it was my second meeting. The first one I'd gone to, they were talking about drugs I didn't identify with. I could identify now, but at that point I was very much about what it looks like on the outside, and I needed to hear somebody's experience that was really similar to mine outwardly, as well as inwardly. And that's what got me into recovery. And I stayed actually clean and sober for 4.5 years. But I never really thought that alcohol was an issue. I was told not to drink, and so I didn't. But I never really thought alcohol was an issue, even though, let's remember, when I was 14, I drank to blackout.
Yeah.
And I had a sponsor that very first time who went, she made me write my life story, like my drug and drinking history. And when she read it, she went, there's a lot of alcohol in your story. And I was like, yeah, but I just do that like everybody else. And I really thought I did. And it took me picking up alcohol again, what I now call a relapse, and running with that for a couple of years, and it not really hitting the spot quite as much as, my drug of choice and other party drugs. And so in the end, I just ended up doing all of them again for, 2, nearly 3 years. And it's taking me to the same place of like, I don't want to live like this. And so then I came back in, and that's 13 and a half, getting on for 14 years ago.
Wow. Well, what a story. And, I hope this isn't so patronizing. Well done, you. I mean,
I'll take it. Thank you very much.
It's incredible.
It wasn't always easy.
No.
And I couldn't have done it on my own. I couldn't have done it without the support of the 12-step community, the others like me, who I see regularly. And I tell you what else, I couldn't have done it without Philippa, and that is the missing piece my first time around really was I didn't know I was HSP.
Yeah.
And second time around, I was about a year in. It's about a year clean and sober. And I realised I was having a different experience with my recovery.
Interesting.
To many of the people in the meetings I went to, many of the people who talked the loudest and the most vociferously, who were probably not HSP, that's why they were talking the loudest and the most vociferously.
Yeah.
And sometimes, bless them, creating a little bit of disorder. And I found that really jangling to my nerves, really frazzling. And also this idea that I should be doing a meeting every day, and I should be like doing a lot of stuff for my recovery. Now, I was working full time in quite a stressful job at the same time, and that was a lot to like completely change my life again and hold down a stressful job, and also do all the extra stuff that I was supposed to do. And I just thought, I can't do this. This is too tiring for me. As HSPs, we need a lot of downtime. We need a lot of alone time. We can get frazzled by people. We can get frazzled and, distressed by chaos and kind of disarray and disorder. And I realized I was having a really different experience to people. So my career at that point, and for, quite a while afterwards, was as a researcher, academic researcher, and then a kind of applied policy researcher. And so I'm good with Google. So I got on Google and just Googled lots and lots of things. And I eventually happened upon Elaine Aron's work, the original highly sensitive person researcher. Yep. I happened upon her work, and I just thought, this sounds like me. And I ordered her book and I read her book, and all the pieces fell into place. And I realized I am not only an addict and an alcoholic and all the other addictive things, but I'm also an HSP. And that has been fundamental in helping me to get a sustained period of recovery this time around, because it gave me permission to do recovery and follow the suggestions, but also temper those suggestions with the knowledge that being HSP, I was going to have to build in more downtime.
Yeah.
And maybe choose the meetings that were that I felt were really nourishing to me.
Yes.
I go to some women's meetings, which I really love. They feel really safe. They're really beautiful. There's quite a lot of HSP women I've met in those meetings. It is my suspicion, and sometimes I know they are. And it's just helped me to really get what I need from recovery as somebody in recovery, but also as an HSP, somebody who's highly sensitive or high sensory.
Yeah. And I was having a real real emotional reaction to what you were saying. I mean, I'm so glad you found the HSP part of the puzzle, and that's really helped you in your recovery. And what you're saying about recovery meetings, finding ones that suited you. I mean, it's very much like that with therapy. I've been talking to somebody recently who wasn't getting on with their therapist, and I said, you don't have to stay with them. Instead of, I don't want to hurt their feelings, I said, look, if the therapist is their feelings are hurt by you moving to somebody else, that's their work to do, not yours. Your work is to find a therapist that works for you and that is really going to help you. And the same with the meetings, find meetings that suit you. And maybe every day is a bit much. If as an HSP,
if one is working as well,
exactly,
all you've got to do is go to one meeting a day, then that's probably fine. But if you're fitting it in around work, family, other commitments, whatever it is, that might be a bit much. And these days I generally do 3 a week. And that's a nice balance for me. And then I talk to, my recovery friends, my sponsors. I have 2 because one's not enough. And so I feel really supported and held by all of that, by that community, as well as the coaching community that you and I met in.
You're amazing.
Oh, bless you.
It takes some real dedication to do that. And what do you think? I hope this doesn't sound like a crass question. What has your recovery, as well as discovering you are HSP, made possible for you now?
Well, I suppose I'm still alive.
Yeah.
That's pretty key, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I'm still alive. And being in recovery has given me the freedom to uncover who I really am. I could never have done that if I was still alive and I was drinking and smoking weed every day. I would be really, really unwell. I'd be really poorly, if not physically, certainly mentally, and I would be unable to have done any of this work. First of all, it was the most obvious blocks to me becoming more authentic. So that had to go. It had to go. And as I went along, I've also, been in like programs for relationships, and I've dabbled with the food ones and the money ones and whatever. I mean, I've tried many of them and they're all brilliant. And they all work on the same principles of we need help, really. And I know some people can get really put off by the fact that there's the word God in the program and the steps. Some people can really get put off of that. I was really put off by that. My very first meeting, when I didn't stay, and I saw this word God in the like poster on the wall, and I thought, these people are crazy. Oh my God, this is a cult. I can't come here. What are they talking about? This is awful. I just want to learn how to, have like, a nice social drink and the occasional spliff at parties. And, what I came to realize is that's not possible for me, because it is always the first one that does the damage. And secondly, that these are not religious programs. I don't have to use the word God. I can use higher power. I can use nature. I can use higher self. These are spiritual programs for spiritual people. And as HSPs, we are often very spiritual people, whether we know it or not, whether we see it in those terms or not. So it is also, and this is why it's worked really well for me, it's also really helped me connect to that spiritual part of me, which was the bit that was trying to talk to me all along. That's where my light comes from. So it's, my God, that it's helped me do that.
Wow, that's incredible. And you are now using that light to help other people.
Well, that's the plan. Yes. And and yes, and I feel that, and I know when I'm doing that, because I can feel it inside and it feels really good. It feels like, and I imagine I know you share this feeling as well. It's like every bit of my life, all the difficulty and the pain and the struggle, because it has been a struggle to get through some of those times, has been a struggle to be in recovery and then out and then taken to a really, really, really painful place again. And in recovery, I've also had some illnesses that have taken me to some pretty dark places too. It has been a struggle, but all of that is valuable because I can bring all of that to the work that I do.
Yeah.
I can hold a lot of other people's stuff. Because there's not many emotions I haven't felt.
No, you've been through.
There's not much darkness I haven't been to. And I did say earlier, but from the darkness comes the light. And it is my belief that the darker places we've been in, the brighter we're able to shine because of it. And I think, that's true of you as well.
Well, hooray to that. Hooray to finding the light and shining, because what an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing so openly everything.
Oh God, you can't shut me up, Philippa.
Well, and thank you for being here, and thank you for shining your light. The world needs your light.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And I think in the interest of time, we better wrap it up. I feel like we could talk for ages, but it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
For me too. Thank you.
Now, Jane, we've just done our goodbyes, and then I've completely remembered that I forgot to ask you where people can find you. Where can people find you?
Oh, well, thank you so much for asking, Philippa. So they can find me on my website, which is Jane, plain Jane, without a Y, Jane Elizabeth Aston.com, or listen to the podcast, which is called High Sensory People, and you can find that in all the usual places.
Lovely. Thank you. And I'm glad I remembered that before we'd left Zoom. So that's great. Thank you. And go and check Jane out in those places and find out what she's about. Find out more than she's already told us today. Okay, thanks. Thanks for listening to HSP Connection. If you've enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. Also, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate the podcast and share it with anyone you think might be interested. It helps others find us. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave us a review.
To get in touch with us, you can email us at hspconnectionpodcast@gmail.com. And we'd love to hear from you with your thoughts and comments on the episodes and any suggestions you have for future topics and guests.
We are both HSP coaches and speakers. And to find out more about Robbie, go to Robbie Leigh, that's leigh.com.
And to find out more about Philippa, go to safeandsupported.co.uk. See you next time.